The explosion tore through the air, and when Zach Harper hit the ground, everything went black. When he finally opened his eyes in the hospital, he couldn't feel his legs, but all he could think about was Cassie. His loyal German shepherd, his partner, his lifeline, where was she? As he struggled to make sense of his new reality, the news hit him like a second blow: Cassie wasn't his anymore. The department was reassigning her. But Zach wasn't about to let that happen. What they didn't understand was that Cassie wasn't just a K9, she was his family. And he was willing to fight with everything he had to keep her by his side. Detective Zach Harper had spent years building a reputation as one of the most dependable and courageous officers in the Los Angeles Police Department. Whether it was cracking tough cases or leading high-stakes operations, Zach was the kind of cop everyone wanted on their team. But if you asked him, he'd say his true secret weapon was Cassie, his loyal German shepherd and trusted K9 partner. For 7 years, they had been an inseparable team, tackling everything from dangerous drug busts to search and rescue missions. Cassie wasn't just a service dog, she was family. That bond was tested one fateful day during a mission to apprehend a dangerous fugitive. The suspect, a wanted felon with a history of violence, was cornered in a desolate industrial area. Zach and Cassie were leading the chase, their movements synchronized like clockwork. Cassie darted ahead, her sharp senses guiding them closer to their target. Zach trusted her implicitly, her instincts had saved his life more than once. Suddenly, the suspect turned and fired. Zach ducked behind a rusted car, shouting for backup into his radio. The sound of gunfire echoed through the lot, but Zach's focus was razor-sharp. Cassie growled low, her body tense as she stood between Zach and the danger. Then it happened, a deafening explosion ripped through the air. Zach barely had time to register the blast before he was thrown backward by the shockwave, his body slamming hard against the ground. When he opened his eyes, the world was blurry and spinning. His ears rang, and pain shot through his back like lightning. Through the haze, he saw Cassie standing over him, barking fiercely at anyone who approached. Her sharp barks cut through the chaos, a protective wall between Zach and the world. Paramedics arrived moments later, but Cassie refused to leave his side. It took 2 officers to gently coax her into a transport vehicle so they could get Zach to the hospital. In the ambulance, Zach drifted in and out of consciousness. He caught glimpses of Cassie's worried eyes watching him through the window of her transport cage. Even in his disoriented state, he felt comforted knowing she was there. He clung to that image as the paramedics worked to stabilize him. Hours later, Zach woke up in a sterile hospital room. His body felt heavy, his head foggy from painkillers. A doctor stood at his bedside, her expression serious. "Detective Harper," she began, her voice calm but somber. "You suffered a severe spinal injury during the explosion. I'm afraid the damage is permanent. You won't be able to walk again." The words hit him like another explosion, this time inside his chest. He stared at the ceiling, trying to process the reality of what she had just said. Walking, running, chasing down suspects, all the things that had defined his life and career were gone in an instant. And then another thought crept in, one that made his stomach twist: what would happen to Cassie? He tried to sit up, but the pain stopped him. "Where's Cassie?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "She's fine," the doctor assured him. "She's been cared for by your department since the incident. They've been waiting for you to wake up to discuss her future." Her future. The words echoed ominously in his mind. Zach already knew what that meant. As a K9 officer, Cassie was technically property of the police department. If Zach was no longer able to serve, Cassie would be reassigned to another handler. The thought of losing her, his partner, his closest friend, was more unbearable than the news about his legs. Staring at the hospital ceiling, Zach made a silent vow. No matter what it took, he wasn't going to lose Cassie. The days in the hospital stretched endlessly for Zach as he struggled to adjust to his new reality. The pain from his injury was nothing compared to the growing dread of what he knew was coming: the department's decision about Cassie. Every time a nurse or doctor came into his room, he braced himself for the news, but no one brought it up directly. Instead, his colleagues who visited tried to avoid the subject, their awkward silences telling him everything he needed to know. One afternoon, Captain Matt O'Connor came to visit. Matt was an old-school officer, a man who had seen everything the job could throw at him, and he'd always been a mentor to Zach. He entered the room quietly, a sympathetic look on his face, and sat down in the chair next to Zach's bed. After a few moments of small talk, Matt sighed and leaned forward. "Zach, we need to talk about Cassie," he said, his tone gentle but firm. Zach's jaw tightened. He had been dreading this conversation but knew it was inevitable. "What about her?" Matt hesitated, then continued. "The department's policy is clear. K-9 units are reassigned when their handlers can no longer perform their duties. Cassie's still an active service dog, and they're already preparing to transfer her to another officer." The words hit Zach like a blow to the chest. He gripped the edge of his blanket, his knuckles turning white. "She's not just a dog, Matt. She's my partner. My family. You can't just take her away from me." Matt looked at him with sympathy but also a hint of resignation. "I know what she means to you, Zach. Everyone does. But the department has rules, and they're not easy to bend. Cassie's trained to work, and they believe she'll adapt to a new handler." Zach shook his head, his voice rising. "She won't adapt. She's not a tool you can just pass around. She's been with me for 7 years, through everything. You know how loyal she is. You can't expect her to forget that and move on like nothing happened." Matt leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. "Look, I don't agree with it either. If it were up to me, I'd let her retire and stay with you. But this isn't my call. The higher-ups see her as a resource, not as your partner." Zach's frustration boiled over. "Then I'll fight them. I don't care what it takes, I'm not losing her." Matt nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I figured you'd say that. Look, there might be a way, but it's not going to be easy. You could file for her early retirement. It'll require a lot of paperwork, support from the department, and maybe even a few legal battles. But it's the only shot you've got." Zach's heart raced at the possibility. "I'll do it. Whatever it takes, I'll do it." Matt stood and placed a hand on Zach's shoulder. "All right. I'll help you however I can. But be ready for a fight, it's going to take everything you've got." After Matt left, Zach stared out the hospital window, his mind racing. He thought about Cassie, her unwavering loyalty, her bravery, and how she had always been there for him. The idea of losing her was unbearable, but now he had a sliver of hope. He didn't know how long the battle would take or how many obstacles he'd face, but one thing was certain, he wasn't giving up on her. Just as she had fought for him, he would fight for her. Over the next week, Zach threw himself into the fight to keep Cassie. Even while confined to his hospital bed, he worked tirelessly, making calls, gathering information, and coordinating with anyone who could help. Captain Matt O'Connor had kept his word, becoming Zach's strongest ally in the battle. Together, they began the process of filing for Cassie's early retirement, a move that would allow her to stay with Zach permanently. The process, however, was anything but straightforward. Zach quickly learned that the bureaucracy surrounding K-9 units was a maze of red tape and rigid policies. The department viewed service dogs as assets, trained and maintained at great expense, and retiring them early was rare. For Cassie to be considered, Zach had to prove that she would no longer be effective under a new handler. He also needed to demonstrate that keeping her with him was in her best interest. Matt helped Zach draft letters of support, pulling in testimonies from colleagues who had witnessed the bond between Zach and Cassie firsthand. One officer, who had been present during the explosion that injured Zach, wrote about how Cassie had refused to leave his side, even as chaos erupted around them. "She's not just a K-9, the officer wrote. She's his protector, his partner, and his family. Separating them would do more harm than good." Zach also reached out to the department's veterinarian, who had cared for Cassie throughout her career. The vet confirmed that while Cassie was in excellent physical health, the stress of being reassigned to a new handler could negatively impact her well-being. "Cassie is highly intelligent and emotionally bonded to Detective Harper," the vet wrote in their report. Forcing her to adapt to a new partner after such a traumatic incident would likely result in anxiety and behavioral issues. Despite the growing stack of evidence in his favor, Zach knew the decision wouldn't come easily. The department's leadership was reluctant to set a precedent that could complicate future K-9 assignments. He also faced skepticism from some higher-ups who believed that Cassie's skills were too valuable to retire early. One evening, as Zach sat in his hospital room reviewing the final documents for the retirement request, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The physical and emotional toll of the fight was wearing him down, but he refused to stop. He thought of Cassie, imagining her sitting in a kennel, confused and wondering where he was. That thought alone was enough to reignite his determination. Matt stopped by later that night, carrying a cup of coffee and a folder of additional paperwork. "How are you holding up?" he asked, sitting down across from Zach. "I'm tired," Zach admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I can't stop now." "She's worth it." Matt nodded. "You're doing the right thing. A lot of people would have given up by now, but not you. That says a lot about the kind of partner you are and the kind of person you are." Zach managed a faint smile. "I just want her to be happy. She's done so much for me, I owe her this." The two men worked late into the night, finalizing the application and preparing for the next step, presenting their case to the department's review board. It was a daunting prospect, but Zach felt a flicker of hope as he looked at the stack of letters, reports, and documents they had compiled. He knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that they might actually have a chance. The day of the department review board meeting arrived, and Zach felt a mix of anxiety and determination as Matt wheeled him into the conference room. His wheelchair creaked softly on the polished floor, the sound amplified by the heavy silence in the room. Around the long table sat several high-ranking officials from the department, each holding thick files of paperwork. Their expressions ranged from neutral to skeptical. Zach could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he held his head high, determined to make his case. Cassie wasn't there, she was being cared for at the K-9 facility, but Zach could feel her presence in his mind as clearly as if she were sitting next to him. He had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, rehearsing his arguments and reviewing the evidence. Now it was time to speak not just for himself, but for Cassie. Captain Matt O'Connor opened the meeting with a summary of their request, laying out the key points of the argument for Cassie's early retirement. He spoke about her years of exemplary service, her unique bond with Zach, and the potential harm that reassignment could cause her. "Cassie isn't just a tool or a resource," Matt said, his voice firm but measured. "She's a living, feeling creature who has given everything to this department. Separating her from Detective Harper after all they've been through would be unjust and inhumane." Next, Zach was invited to speak. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before beginning. "Cassie has been my partner for 7 years, he said, his voice calm but resolute. "She's not just a service dog, she's my family. Together, we've faced some of the most dangerous situations you can imagine. She saved my life more times than I can count. And when I was injured, she stayed by my side, refusing to leave me, even when it wasn't safe for her. That's the kind of loyalty Cassie has shown me. How can I do any less for her?" As he spoke, Zach could see some of the officials shifting in their seats, their expressions softening. He continued, "Cassie has been through enough. Reassigning her to another handler would cause her unnecessary stress and confusion. She's not a machine you can just hand off to someone else, she's a living being who deserves stability and care. I know what she needs, and I'm ready to provide that for her. She's given her life to this department. Now it's time for the department to give something back to her." When Zach finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the chair of the review board, a stern-looking man with silver hair, leaned forward and cleared his throat. "Detective Harper, your dedication to Cassie is evident. However, the department has policies in place for a reason. Service dogs are trained to adapt to new handlers, and their purpose is to serve the public. What makes you believe Cassie should be treated differently?" Zach met the man's gaze without flinching. "Because Cassie isn't just a service dog, she's an individual. Her loyalty and bond with me go beyond training. We've been through so much together that separating us would hurt her as much as it would hurt me. And honestly, after all she's given to this department, hasn't she earned the right to retire with the person who loves her most?" The chair remained silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Thank you, detective. We'll review your request and notify you of our decision." As Zach and Matt left the room, Zach felt both relief and uncertainty. He had done everything he could, but now the decision was out of his hands. The next few days would be a waiting game, but Zach knew one thing for certain: no matter the outcome, he had fought for Cassie with everything he had. And that, in itself, was a victory. The waiting was agonizing. Days passed with no word from the department review board, and Zach found himself replaying every moment of the meeting in his mind. Had he said enough? Had he convinced them? Each time his phone buzzed, his heart jumped, only to feel the crushing weight of disappointment when it wasn't the call he was waiting for. Even Matt, always calm and composed, seemed restless as they waited for the decision. Meanwhile, Cassie remained at the K-9 facility, and the absence of her presence weighed heavily on Zach. His home felt empty without the sound of her paws on the floor or her comforting presence at his side. He wondered if she missed him as much as he missed her. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined her lying in a kennel, confused and waiting for him to come back. The thought broke his heart. To distract himself, Zach threw himself into preparation. Though the decision was out of his hands, he reviewed every document they had submitted, ready to fight back if the board ruled against him. He also reached out to some of his colleagues, who assured him that everyone at the station was rooting for him. The support gave him strength, but the uncertainty lingered. Finally, 5 days after the meeting, the call came. Zach's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and he nearly knocked over his coffee mug as he scrambled to grab it. Seeing the department's number on the screen, he took a deep breath to steady himself before answering. "This is Detective Harper," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "Detective Harper, this is Officer Daniels from the review board," the voice on the other end said. There was a pause, and Zach gripped the phone tighter. "We've reviewed your request and the supporting documentation. After careful consideration, the board has made its decision." Zach's breath caught. He felt like the entire world had gone silent as he waited for the next words. "We have approved Cassie's early retirement," Daniels said. "She will officially be removed from active duty and placed in your care." For a moment, Zach couldn't speak. Relief and emotion surged through him, leaving him unable to do anything but close his eyes and let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice thick. "Thank you for giving her this chance." "The decision wasn't easy," Daniels continued. "But your dedication and the evidence you provided made it clear that this was the right choice. Cassie is lucky to have you." As Zach hung up, he felt a wave of emotions crash over him: relief, joy, gratitude. He immediately called Matt to share the news. "We did it," Zach said, his voice filled with emotion. "She's coming home." "I knew you'd pull it off," Matt replied, the pride evident in his voice. "Cassie's lucky to have a partner who fights for her like that. She deserves this." That afternoon, Zach made his way to the K-9 facility. When he arrived, one of the handlers greeted him with a smile. "She's been waiting for you," they said, leading him to the kennels. As soon as Cassie saw Zach, her tail started wagging furiously, and she let out an excited bark. Zach wheeled himself closer, and Cassie rushed to him, pressing her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as tears filled his eyes. "I told you I wouldn't give up on you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're coming home." Cassie licked his face, her tail wagging so hard it seemed like she might topple over. It was as if she understood everything that had happened, and in that moment, Zach knew the fight had been worth it. No policy or rule could ever replace the bond they shared, and now, nothing would ever separate them again. Bringing Cassie home was the moment Zach had dreamed of since the day everything had changed. As they pulled up to his house, Cassie sat in the passenger seat of the car, her head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. She looked so happy and free, and it filled Zach's heart with a warmth he hadn't felt in months. He couldn't stop smiling, even as he parked and wheeled himself out to let her out. The second the door opened, Cassie jumped down, tail wagging as she sniffed the familiar ground. "Welcome home, girl," Zach said, reaching out to scratch her ears. Cassie pressed her head into his hand, letting out a contented sigh. Inside, Zach had prepared a special space just for her. In the corner of the living room was a new dog bed, surrounded by her favorite toys, bowls of fresh food and water, and even a blanket she used to sleep on back when she worked with him. Cassie walked over, sniffed everything thoroughly, then turned and padded back to Zach, sitting down at his feet as if to say, "This is nice, but I'd rather stay close to you." The first night together felt like old times. Cassie curled up by his wheelchair as Zach worked on some paperwork at the dining table. Every so often, he'd glance down at her, and she'd lift her head, her eyes meeting his as if to remind him she was there. Later, when they settled on the couch, Cassie climbed up beside him, resting her head on his lap. Zach gently stroked her fur, the simple act bringing him a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, Zach decided to take Cassie for a walk around the neighborhood. Although he was still getting used to navigating life in a wheelchair, having Cassie by his side made him feel stronger, more capable. They moved together in perfect sync, just like they always had, and as they passed by neighbors, many stopped to greet them. "Good to see you both back together," one neighbor said with a warm smile. "She looks so happy." Zach nodded, glancing down at Cassie, who wagged her tail in response. "We're where we belong," he replied. Over the weeks that followed, Cassie adapted seamlessly to her new life. Though she was officially retired, her protective instincts remained sharp. She stayed close to Zach at all times, often sitting by the door when he was out of her sight, waiting patiently for his return. Zach started bringing her along to his therapy sessions, where she became something of a mascot, brightening everyone's spirits with her calm and gentle demeanor. One afternoon, Matt stopped by the house to check in. Cassie greeted him with excited barks, remembering the man who had helped save her place in Zach's life. "She's thriving," Matt said, watching as Cassie trotted around the yard. "You both are." Zach smiled, leaning back in his wheelchair. "I feel like she saved me as much as I saved her," he admitted. "Having her here gives me a reason to keep pushing forward." Matt nodded. "That's what makes you a good team. You take care of each other." As the sun began to set that evening, Zach and Cassie sat together on the porch, a soft breeze rustling the trees. Zach reached down to scratch behind Cassie's ears, and she leaned into his touch, her tail thumping softly against the wooden boards. "You've been through a lot, girl," Zach said quietly. "But we made it. You're home, and no one's ever going to take you away again." Cassie looked up at him, her eyes filled with trust and loyalty, and let out a soft bark as if to say, "I know." In that moment, Zach felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Cassie, but for the journey they had taken together. She had been his partner through the most challenging times of his life, and now, in this new chapter, she was more than his dog. She was his family, his source of strength, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, loyalty and love could light the way forward. Together, they were unstoppable. The ending of this story is a beautiful testament to the power of loyalty, perseverance, and the bond between humans and animals. Zach's journey to keep Cassie wasn't just about a man trying to hold on to his dog, it was about fighting for what truly matters in life: love, trust, and connection. Despite the overwhelming challenges he faced, from losing his ability to walk to navigating a rigid system that viewed Cassie as a resource rather than a living, feeling partner, Zach never gave up. His determination to give Cassie the life she deserved proved that true partnership transcends rules and policies. Cassie's return home to Zach felt like justice not just for her, but for every story where loyalty and dedication are tested. The fact that Zach was willing to fight through pain, bureaucracy, and doubt to keep her by his side shows the strength of their bond, a bond that not even tragedy could break. This story reminds us that animals aren't just companions, they are family. Cassie wasn't just a service dog, she was a hero in her own right, and Zach's fight for her retirement was also a fight to honor her sacrifices. The ending, where they find peace and a new beginning together, is deeply satisfying because it highlights the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of unconditional love. It's a story that inspires us to fight for the things and the beings we hold dear, no matter how difficult the road may seem.